Hi everyone, and welcome to Be True, my podcast about the writing I love and the writing I do. I promise I won't rhyme the whole time. I'm John Tessitore, and today, my first ever Q&A podcast. After publishing 12 experimental books and a slew of journal poems and recording 56, now 57, episodes of this podcast, all available at johntessitore.com, I thought an Ask Me Anything episode might just work. Also, a lovely and wise and trusted and hilarious person suggested that I do it. Thank you very much. So here goes. Thanks to everyone on Instagram and Substack who submitted questions. We'll start with a big one. What's your favorite poem if you absolutely have to pick one? Ugh. I'm staring at my bookshelves right now and can think of poems by Frost and Stevens and Cavafy and Emily Dickinson and Langston Hughes and T.S. Eliot and Seamus Heaney and James Merrill and Gary Snyder and Allen Ginsberg and Mary Jo Salter and Rita Dove and Elizabeth Bishop and Tom Gunn and Paul Muldoon. I mean, holy hell. But everything begins for me with Walt Whitman. We're from the same part of the world, Long Island, Brooklyn, Manhattan. We traveled the same roads 100 years apart. I recognize some of his temperament in myself, the good and the bad. And I ended up making him the center of my graduate studies. So I have a long relationship with Walt Whitman. And I have a very long and personal relationship with his poem, Crossing Brooklyn Ferry. It's a poem about commuting between Brooklyn and Manhattan by boat in the mid-19th century. And it's about imagining the people, past, present, and future, who have made, are making, or will make that journey. And about what it means to live in the continuum of space and time. I really should do an entire something, a podcast episode, something, about this poem. But in the interest of time, I'll just read the lines that sealed the deal for me, toward the end of the poem. In section 7, the poet says, "Closer yet I approach you. What thought you have of me now, I had as much of you. I laid in my stores in advance. I considered long and seriously of you before you were born. Who was to know what should come home to me? Who knows? But I am enjoying this. Who knows? For all the distance. But I am as good as looking at you now. For all you cannot see me." The first time I read that passage, I imagined myself looking down from the ferry rail into the water, and imagined Whitman staring back at me in the reflection on the surface, as indeed I think he does. And in that moment, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with myself, which is a story for another time. I have to stop myself from taking up this whole episode, but let me know if that's of interest, a full episode on Crossing Brooklyn Ferry. I think I have a lot to say about it. But on to question 2. Do you use a thesaurus and dictionary when you write poems to find the words that feel right? The answer is absolutely. In fact, you'll know I'm feeling good about what I'm doing if you were able to watch me, because I look like a mad scientist when it's going well. Thesaurus on my lap, dictionary next to me, other books open and scattered across the desk. I have all kinds of requirements for the words in my poems, even artificial and arbitrary restrictions, like length and appearance. I am not suggesting that I pick the right words, but you can be sure that even my shittiest words have been chosen very carefully, for whatever reason, in the moment. So the next time you see something I've written and think, that's a terrible word choice, I'm sure you're right, and I beg your pity, because that shitty word choice may have cost me 3 days of my life. Question 3. Are your podcast episodes carefully scripted or improvised? The questioner goes on to say that they often sound natural, which is a real compliment because the truth is, I plan them out in great detail, and I do some tightening and editing as well. Here's how I see it. For whatever reason you've hit play on your podcast listening device, that is an enormous gift for which I am eternally grateful. The greatest gift for a person trying to be creative is an audience's attention. And my job is to make that investment worth your while, to make it interesting, informative, entertaining, and efficient, concise. The worst thing I could do with this podcast, I think, is waste your time. So I try to make sure that each episode works as a formal essay, beginning, middle, end, payoff, without a lot of ums and stray words and imprecisions and plosives and fumbling. I definitely improvise along the way, but I worked from a script to keep the production as tight as possible. Plus, I'm a writer and an editor, professionally, so I get a little manic about the whole thing too, which again is what I'm supposed to do if you've offered up your ears and your valuable time. And thank you again. Question 4. Will you continue to use photographs in your chapbooks like you did in Body Songs? Now this is a very interesting question to me and speaks to an evolution in my work that still surprises me. If you haven't seen all of my books, Body Songs is a book of poems about love and intimacy, a short book I released for Valentine's Day a couple of years ago. When it was almost finished, I thought it needed some extra punch, something to drive home the humanity and the risk of intimacy. Maybe some pictures. So in the DIY spirit of my little books and of this podcast, in which every aspect is created by yours truly, I included some abstract photos of a body, in this case my own. I figured the book was about the glory of being human, so it would be a cop-out if I was too squeamish about my own humanity. This little foray into the visual seemed to go pretty well, so when I was compiling the poems of another book, Sometimes I Still Pray, a family album, I decided to scatter some actual family pictures among the poems. Then I published My City of Yesterday, a weird hero's journey through suburban America, and still one of my favorites that I've ever published. And that's when two artists I know, Ted Randler and Pete Shorney, offered some of their work for the cover and the pages inside. And I could do an entire episode about the artists I've worked with on these little books, including cover images by Pierre Gustafson and Bill Travis. And then I published The Americans, a collection inspired by Robert Frank's black and white photo book of the 1950s, also called The Americans. At that point I figured, what the hell? And I included some of my own color photos of American scenes among my American poems. And then I published On Self-Expression After the Revolution, a New York protest punk collection that was inspired by an exhibit of Chinese outsider art, which featured lots of confrontational portraits and selfies. And at that point, there was no way not to include a few more of my abstracted body images among the urban landscapes. So there you go. A crazy writer of poems dabbles in the visual arts. Not something I ever imagined I would do. But now I know if I stumble into the right project, I'd include images of all kinds without a moment's hesitation. That dam broke a while ago. Final question for this episode, number 5, and I'm going to read it straight because it's from the boss, Claire Tom, editor-in-chief of the Wee Sparrow Poetry Press, which I help edit. And I quote, "Which song makes you instantly get up and dance when you hear it? I'm sure you're a dancer with great moves, Tessitore." This sentence followed by a laughing hysterically emoji and a rolling on the floor with laughter emoji. Nice. Someday, Claire, you will see me cut a rug, and you will eat those emojis. So this one really had me thinking, because now we're talking about something that really matters. Earlier I said that you'd know I was writing well if I looked like a mad scientist in his laboratory, and you'll know I'm living well if I'm listening to a lot of music. But dance? Yes, I move constantly. But Claire is asking about a song that makes me move compulsively, even unintentionally. And the only way I can answer that is by telling you what song does that to me today. But first, the group that does that to me the most consistently. And this may come as a surprise to some people who know about my obsessions with less danceable artists like Dylan and Cohen and Waits. But the group that makes me dance most consistently is A Tribe Called Quest out of Queens, New York. Rest in peace, Fife. And the song that currently lifts me out of my chair is Sabotage by Beastie Boys out of New York, New York. It hit me the other day. One of my favorite songs ever is Debaser by the Pixies, which is all raw, screaming energy. Sabotage is what Debaser would sound like if Black Francis had some roll in his rock, or if he allowed Kim Deal to get funky on the bass. Believe me, the people around me have heard enough Beasties in the past few weeks to last a lifetime, but I am not apologizing. So that's it. My first Q&A episode. This is John Tessitore concluding another installment of Be True. If you've listened this long, thank you. And let me know if you think I should do another sometime. You can find all of my work at johntessitore.com. But first, read Walt Whitman while listening to Beastie Boys, and you'll get a sense of what it's like to live in my brain. Special thanks to a lovely and wise and trusted and hilarious person for suggesting that I do this episode, and to me for today's theme music, which I call E-Chord. Maybe we'll talk again, and if you enjoyed this little podcast, leave some stars or a review and tell your friends. In the meantime, I gotta feed the dog. All right, Luna, I'm coming.